Standing in the falls of the Kath Mandau Precinct, surrounded by the plinths that once held statues of all 20 Primarchs, Rogal Dorn finds two gaps. The words Dan Abnett gave him in the Lightning Tower are exact. The 2nd and 11th plinths had been vacant for a long time. No one ever spoke of those two absent brothers. Their separate tragedies had seemed like aberrations. Had they in fact been warnings that no one had heeded? Separate tragedies. That phrase does specific work. Dorn couldn't lie. The Lightning Tower itself establishes that he embodied the human quest for truth and couldn't tell a lie even when deception would have aided his cause. When Dorn says separate tragedies, he means two events, not one consolidated failure. The canonical timeline confirms the distinction. The 2nd Primarch was erased before the 11th was even rediscovered. Primarch XI was the 19th of the 20 located during the Great Crusade, arriving late.
He served for several decades before meeting his fate sometime before Monarchia was razed.
Years between reunion and obliteration, not decades. Two Edicts of Obliteration, issued at separate moments for separate reasons. If their tragedies were separate, they weren't each other's pair. And if they weren't each other's pair, then among the 18 Primarchs whose names survive the purge, one has a designed opposite who never functioned. That absence has a shape. The shape describes a purpose. The purpose is what the 11th was for. This isn't a question about names. The surviving entry for Primarch XI carries one phrase the Edict of Obliteration couldn't entirely erase. He embodied an aspect of the Emperor with his own purpose and specialty. That aspect, that specialty, those follow from the structure of all 20. Start with Angron, because Angron is where the structure becomes visible. Ian St.
Martin's Angron, slave of Nuceria. The Primarch series novel dedicated to him describes an empathic capacity that manifested before the butcher's nails were installed, the ability to take the pain of those around him into himself, knowing he had the strength to bear it, an absorptive function, the capacity to receive others' suffering and carry it through the specific durability a Primarch's physiology was built to possess. What the novel describes is a gladiator caretaker, not a berserker. A substantial portion of Slave of Nuceria follows pre-Nails warhounds on a compliance action, applying the traditional disciplined warfare of spear, shield, and axe. The 12th Legion's doctrine before Angron reshaped it. That was the legion a functioning empath Primarch was meant to lead. Men who could be felt as individuals rather than processed as instruments. Readers of the novel describe watching Angron's flashbacks as almost heartbreaking. The transformation from a caretaking gladiator into the figure the heresy records is legible only if you first see what was destroyed. The aristocracy of Nuceria installed the nails before the Emperor reached Angron. They used the implants on gladiatorial slaves to produce more lethal fighters for their arenas. The mechanism is documented. The nails suppressed serotonin production and deadened all emotional responses except those regulating adrenaline. In Aaron Dembski-Bowden's Master of Mankind, Arcan Land, the most institutionally skeptical figure in Terra's employ, a man whose indifference to space marines is a documented character trait rather than a narrative convenience, watches the sleeping Angron and records what he sees. The Primarch's facial features twitching and tensing in painful harmony with a ravaged nervous system. Constant pain and stillness. A system reacting involuntarily to stimuli that shouldn't produce reaction at all.
The nails inverted the function. What was built to absorb suffering became a machine generating it. What drew pain inward became a device projecting pain outward with no mechanism to stop. That specific inversion, a photographic negative of the original design, not random damage, requires there to have been a design worth inverting. Precise inversions have precise originals. If Angron's empathic capacity was a designed role, the role's counterpart was also designed. The Emperor didn't produce 20 Primarchs who varied at random across the genome. The Primarch project began in M30, built in a facility on Terra under the Emperor alongside the Perpetual Erda and Biotechnical Division Director Amar Astardi. The 20 grown in accelerated generation chambers.
The Forge World Horus Heresy, Book 2, refers explicitly to divergence between in-programming and the influence of the Primarch genotype. In-programming meaning deliberate differentiation, each Primarch individually specified toward particular characteristics. The Great Crusade demanded different things from different campaigns. Conquest and consolidation weren't the same function. It needed builders and destroyers, lawgivers and deterrents, psychic power deployed at maximum capacity alongside psychic capacity suppressed at minimum threshold. Empathic resonance with populations being incorporated, and the null counterweight that would make that resonance stable rather than overwhelming. 20 Primarchs optimized identically toward one specification would have won the wars fitting that specification and left everything outside it unaddressed. The diversity of Primarch characteristics, otherwise difficult to explain as anything except chaos, becomes coherent the moment it maps to complementary paired roles. The Forge World designer who led the Primarchs sculpting project across more than a decade documented his process in a January 2022 Warhammer community article marking the completion of all 18 known Primarchs in physical form. His account of Fulgrim described that model as one half of a duel with Ferrus Manus at Istvan V. He built Fulgrim first while finishing Ferrus, the two conceived as a single statement at that pivotal point in the heresy. His account of Leman Russ went further. Russ and Magnus were designed as two parts of the same scene, with a scenic base that both models fit into, depicting their battle on Prospero. Two halves of one tableau. The people visualizing these characters for physical form are working in pairs. That's design logic expressed in workshop practice.
Games Workshop has never published a formalized taxonomy of 10 deliberate Primarch pairs. What follows is the strongest reading of the textual evidence across the Horus Heresy series, the Primarchs novels, and the Forge World design record. It isn't established canon, and it's framed as such throughout. Some assignments are more textually secure than others. The contested ones are named when they arrive. Pair 1. Leman Russ and Magnus the Red. The most visible pair in the system. Visible enough that Forge World built a landscape diorama around their conflict, and two full-length Horus Heresy novels cover the same events from inside each Primarch's perspective. Graham McNeil's 1,000 Suns, Chris Wright's Prospero Burns. Both characters needed to be credible from inside their own logic. That's what genuine designed opposites demand of the people writing them. Magnus was the most warp-gifted of the Primarchs. He secretly taught his 1,000 Suns sorcery on Prospero, pursued transcendence through accumulated psychic knowledge, and eventually broke the Emperor's decree absolute from the Council of Nicaea. The great adjudication of psychic use held mid-Crusade by sending a psychic warning to Terra about Horus's corruption. The warning reached its destination. It also triggered the burning of Prospero. Russ arrived with orders Horus had modified and executed what he understood as the Emperor's directive. At Prospero, he shattered Magnus's arm and drove the 1,000 Suns into the warp and into Tzeentch's service. Calling this pair psychic versus null is insufficient and factually wrong. Russ wasn't a null. He carried what the lore describes as the weird, latent psychic sensitivity tied to Fenrisian shamanism, surfacing periodically as uncontrolled visions.
He maintained rune priests in the Space Wolves while opposing Magnus's librarians, a contradiction his fellow Primarchs noticed and occasionally raised. He possessed what Magnus studied and maximized, and his response was to suppress it, deny it, and oppose its organized practice wherever he encountered it. The axis isn't psychic versus null. It's the theorist transcendent against the pragmatist animal. Magnus approached the warp as an infinite domain of knowledge to be mapped and ultimately mastered through intellect. Russ experienced the same sensitivity as interference in the clarity he valued, and spent his existence refusing to acknowledge what he carried. The Council of Nicaea made their designed tension institutional. Two incompatible relationships with the same phenomenon, meeting in a chamber where only one reading could prevail. Heresy outcome. Russ loyalist, disappeared into the eye of terror on the hunt. Magnus traitor, elevated to demon prince of Tzeentch. The pair divides exactly along its seam. Pair 2, Rogal Dorn and Perturabo. Both mastered siege architecture as a high art. Imperial fists and iron warriors were the two premier fortification and siege legions of the Great Crusade, so structurally similar in technical capability that the Iron Cage, Perturabo's post-heresy trap for Dorn's forces, required Perturabo to have fully internalized how Dorn thinks. A perfect trap for a stranger isn't possible. A perfect trap for a designed opposite, studied across decades of shared institutional context, is. The architecture is the shared domain. The axis runs underneath it. Dan Abnett's The Lightning Tower establishes that Dorn embodied the human quest for truth and couldn't tell a lie even when deception would have aided his cause. His Forge World sculpt, described by the designer as a stoic, none-shall-pass stance, holds Storm's teeth in a posture of defiant, transparent resolve. Zero psychic ability. Nothing hidden, nothing layered. What he believes, he states. What he decides, he announces. The end and the death follows Dorn through a century in a psychological desert, confronting what appears to be an impossible situation, and he simply refuses to accept it as impossible until evidence forces him. Transparent to the structural floor of his personality. Perturabo's interior inverts every one of those qualities. He accumulated grievance without stating it. He felt the praise others received as a subtraction from what he deserved, but processed none of it externally until the pressure became catastrophic. Guy Haley's Perturabo, the Hammer of Olympia, documents him weeping after ordering the destruction of Olympia, horrified by what he'd done, and then continuing. He was the most fortified position in the Iron Warriors, and nothing inside was directly stated. Everything internal found indirect and eventually devastating expression. The Emperor needed both functions. A commander whose word required no verification, whose openness was itself a strategic resource, and an operator whose intentions required no announcement, whose opacity was a different kind of resource entirely. Designed functional poles. Heresy, outcome. Dorn, loyalist. Perturabo, traitor, elevated to Daemon Prince of Chaos undivided. Split. One honest complication. A canonical in-universe moment has Corvus Corax observing Sanguinius and Angron, Dorn and Guilliman, the Khan and the Wolf as paired relationships, grouping Dorn with Guilliman and Khan with Russ, rather than the assignments above. If that reading is the correct one, Perturabo sits unpaired among the 18. The Dorn-Perturabo assignment in this framework rests on the opposition axis of transparency versus opacity,
which is real regardless of which pairing that in-universe observation implies. Both readings may be capturing something true simultaneously.
The comments will want to argue this, and the argument is worth having. Pair 3, Lion L. Johnson and Conrad Kurz. Both were raised in perpetual darkness. Caliban's forests were dense enough to block sunlight at the canopy, populated by massive beasts that hunted anything moving through them. Lion spent his childhood hunting those beasts back. Nostromo never saw sunlight at all by the time Kurz took power. Its hive cities operated on artificial cycles, their criminal hierarchies working and living in institutional shadow. Both Primarchs became nocturnal hunters before they became commanders. Both weaponized psychological dread as primary operational methodology. The designer's notes on Kurz describe a figure where every surface was deliberately built to inflict pain. Blades incorporated into knee plates, elbows, and the lightning claws named mercy and forgiveness. The aesthetic enforces the doctrine. The Night Lords existed as specialists in terror tactics before the heresy complicated their position. Built as experts in turning fear itself into strategic deterrence, their methods apparently sanctioned by the Emperor for exactly that deterrent function. Kurz applied terror to enforce order on Nostromo and continued applying it at imperial scale. Multiple direct confrontations between Lion and Kurz are canonical across Black Library. The most intellectually significant is described as a battle of words and ideas, because the ideas are the actual conflict. Both operate in the same domain: darkness, psychological warfare, the weaponization of what people fear in the night. One applies that domain in service of law and institutional judgment. The other applies it in service of demonstrative terror, the public display of what defiance costs, repeated with maximum visibility, designed to make the next act of defiance less likely before it begins. Kurz didn't fall to chaos. He'd already reached his terminal function. The Chaos Gods had nothing additional to offer a mind that had already become what it was built to become. He allowed an ever-sore assassin to kill him. He'd foreseen the moment and chose to meet it, accepting the Emperor's verdict while disputing whether that verdict was just. Heresy outcome. Lion loyalist, returned to active service in M42. Kurz traitor, killed by the assassin he let reach him. Split. Pair 4, Sanguinius and Angron. This pair requires separate treatment. It's structurally different from every other pair in the system. Sanguinius, 9th Legion Primarch. What Chris rates Sanguinius, the Great Angel, and Dan Abnett's Echoes of Eternity establish as extraordinary emotional capacity. His speech at the Eternity Gate during the Siege of Terra moved Archon land. A man whose institutional skepticism toward Space Marines is a documented character trait, not a narrative convenience.
The Blood Angels carry the red thirst and the black rage, inherited curses Sanguinius managed in secret for years. In James Swallow's Fear to Tread, Sanguinius explains why he kept the secret. He wouldn't be responsible for the erasure of the Blood Angels from imperial history. He wouldn't have a third empty plinth beneath the hegemon's roof as his legion's only memorial. He'd counted the plinths. He knew what a third erasure would mean, and he knew it was possible. Angron before the nails, absorbing others' suffering and carrying it through the specific durability a Primarch was built to possess. Sanguinius before the siege, feeling collective suffering and transmuting it into sacrifice, expressed across an entire legion through the management of their inherited curse. Both built to feel, both engineered around the reception and management of pain, absorbed, carried, redirected through the fact of a Primarch's strength. Every other pair in this framework is a polarity.
Psychic maximalism and psychic suppression, transparency and opacity, law and terror, mercy and function. Two opposite ends of the same axis. Sanguinius and Angron occupy the same end, one intact, one corrupted before the emperor could prevent it. Same design function, different outcomes. Mirrors, not opposites. That structural distinction carries the entire elimination argument. Nuceria didn't damage Angron at random. The nails inverted exactly what he was built for. The system designed to absorb suffering became a generator of it with no mechanism to stop. The inversion is precise. Sanguinius wasn't Angron's designed opposite. He was Angron's functional counterpart. The same role, running correctly rather than inverted. And the true designed opposite of the empath function, the null, the absence of psychic resonance, the stillness that would make empathic sensitivity legible by contrast rather than overwhelming by reflection, isn't in the 18. Heresy outcome. Sanguinius loyalist, killed by Horus at the Siege of Terra. Angron traitor, apotheosized as demon prince of corn. Split. 5 through 9 move faster. The method is established. One axis, one canonical anchor, one outcome. Pair 5. Vulcan and Ferrus Manus, both master forgers. Their first meeting is documented in Nick Kime's short story Mercy of the Dragon, in which Vulcan teaches Ferrus a lesson about the purpose of craft, and the lesson is the axis. The philosophy attributed to Ferrus: make war and move on, again and again, until nothing breathes that stands against the Imperium, and all else is sophistry and pretty lies. The Iron Hand's foundational doctrine extended this systematically. Flesh is weak. Organic imperfection should be replaced by iron. The body is a design flaw to be corrected toward pure output. Ferrus forged for function. Vulcan's salamanders hold civilian protection as doctrinal bedrock. Sacrifice over glory. Purpose extending beyond output, to include the people who will live under whatever the output achieves. One man built extraordinary things for the greatest possible performance. The other built extraordinary things for the people who'd use them. Both were loyalists. Ferrus died at Isvan V, the drop site massacre, the first Primarch death of the heresy, killed by Fulgrim while fighting on the right side. Vulcan survived, documented throughout Nick Kime's Vulcan Lives. This is the one pair where conviction held in both directions, and assassination broke what ideological failure didn't. Pair 6. Jagatai Khan and Lorgar. Khan is freedom, motion, refusal of stasis. Chris Wright's Path of Heaven is the definitive Khan text. His philosophy treats movement as truth and stasis as a kind of death. The White Scar's entire operational doctrine is built around speed as freedom made tactical. Lorgar is compulsion, devotion, the total surrender of self to what he believes is sacred. He couldn't stop preaching. His arc from the Emperor's most devoted follower, the author of the Lectitio Divinitatis, the Primarch who built worlds around belief, to Chaos's most effective architect, runs on compulsion rather than calculation. The alternative pairing of Khan with Russ is textually real, both nomadic warrior chiefs from cultures built around movement and martial bond, and the in-universe paired observation noted above groups them together. That's named here and left for the comments. Freedom versus compulsion is the more structurally complete polarity for Khan's designed function, and Lorgar's compulsion is the most extreme version of exactly what Khan's entire philosophy refuses. Heresy outcome. Khan loyalist, eventually lost in the Dark Eldar webway. Lorgar traitor, elevated to demon prince of chaos undivided. Split. Pair 7. Rabute Guilliman and Mortarion. Guilliman builds structures that outlast individuals. The Codex Astartes, Imperium Secundus, a fallback imperium established in Ultramar during the heresy when Terra appeared lost. His resurrection and return as Lord Commander of the Indomitus Crusade 10,000 years after the siege. Every major project is designed to persist beyond its architect. Mortarion's philosophy inverts the premise. Anti-psycher, anti-hope, acceptance of death and entropy as the terminal condition of all things rather than a problem human organization can solve. Guilliman extends institutional order against entropy. Mortarion accepts entropy as the answer, and eventually becomes its consecrated instrument under Nurgle. Heresy outcome. Guilliman loyalist, currently active as Lord Commander. Mortarion traitor, elevated to Demon Prince of Nurgle. Split. Pair 8. Horus and Alpharius. Horus was the openly chosen, War Master, first found, first among equals, his authority resting entirely on visibility and on the loyalty of Primarchs who knew exactly who he was and what he represented. The power of the recognized. Alpharius and Omegon operate through distributed anonymity. The declaration, "I am Alpharius," applies to the entire Alpha Legion, a deliberate erasure of individual identity in favor of multiplicity that makes targeting impossible. Dan Abnett's Legion presents the Alpha Legion as potentially working against chaos through means so concealed that their apparent betrayal was itself a form of resistance. The hidden power logic taken to its structural limit. Both nominally fell. If the Legion reading holds, both poles of the transparent versus hidden axis face destruction from opposite directions. Visible authority corrupted into the heresy's central catastrophe. Concealed resistance so thoroughly hidden it became indistinguishable from the enemy. Pair 9. Corvus Corax and Fulgrim. The Raven Guard minimize, erase their own footprint, operate through shadow and guerrilla doctrine, hold zero civilian casualties as both operational practice and institutional identity. Guy Haley's Corax. Lord of Shadows is the dedicated Primarch's novel. The ascetic mode, take nothing, leave no trace, win through absence rather than presence. Fulgrim and the Emperor's children pursued perfection in all things until perfection became indistinguishable from excess. Josh Reynolds D.S., Fulgrim, the Palatine Phoenix, and Graham McNeil's Fulgrim trace an arc moving from perfectionism toward sensory abandon in increments so small that each step seemed reasonable from inside the previous one. The alternative pairing of Corax with Kurz has textual support, both darkness operators, one liberating through shadow, one terrorizing through it. That alternative is named here and left for the comments. The Corax-Fulgrim opposition is the more structurally complete polarity. Two minds at opposite ends of an accumulation axis, one that refuses accumulation entirely, and one that couldn't stop. Heresy outcome. Corax loyalist, disappeared into the eye of terror. Fulgrim traitor, elevated to Demon Prince of Slaanesh. Split. 9 pairs, 18 Primarchs accounted for. 7 of those 9 pairs divided exactly along their design seam during the heresy, 1 loyalist, 1 traitor. The 2 exceptions don't invalidate the pattern.
Vulcan and Ferris, both loyal. Ferris was murdered while fighting the traitors, killed at Istvan V while charging through an ambush that outpaced his tactical support. The seam held in conviction. Assassination broke what ideological failure didn't. Horus and Alpharius, both nominally fell, with Alpharius's actual allegiance remaining the most contested question in Alpha Legion canon. Whether or not the Legion reading is correct, both poles of the transparent versus hidden axis face destruction, which is its own structural argument. 7 of 9 is the fault map of the heresy. The design tensions became the lines along which the catastrophe fractured. Russ burned Prospero. His designed opposite was pulled toward that confrontation through Nicaea, through Horus's interception of the orders, through a chain of events running directly along the psychic pragmatist seam. Perturabo followed Horus. His designed opposite spent the war defending Terra from the siege expertise Perturabo was deploying to destroy it. The lion hunted curs across the final years of the conflict. Guilliman has outlasted Mortarion as Lord Commander of a recovering Imperium 10,000 years on. The opposites were built to pull against each other. The heresy used that pull. What the post-heresy Imperium inherits is a set of halves.
The empath function gone. Sanguinius, dead at Horus's hands at the siege. Angron consuming others' suffering as a demon prince with no mechanism to transmute it. The arch-psyker theorist role burning on the planet of sorcerers as a demon prince of Tzeentch. The death philosopher apotheosized into Nurgle's garden. The terror deterrent killed by the assassin he permitted to reach him. Vulcan's awareness of the accumulating losses is documented in Nick Kime's Vulcan Lives. Speaking to his equerry Artellus Numion on Keraton during the Great Crusade, Vulcan describes what he's seen in Conrad Kurz's heart and what it means for what comes next. He doesn't want another sanction, another empty pillar in the great investiary, another brother's name excised from all record. Grief enough to bear for 2, he says. No wish to add to it. He was bearing grief for 2 before the heresy fully ignited.
The 41st Millennium Imperium is built on surviving halves, structurally lopsided because the design was complete and the heresy consumed half. 20 Primarchs, 9 pairs from the 18 known, 2 lost, erased, their plinths empty in the falls of the Kath Mandau Precinct where Dorn found the gaps. In Dan Abnett's The Unremembered Empire, Robute Guilliman shows Lyon L. Johnson a chamber on Macragge with 21 chairs, 1 for each Primarch, 1 for the Emperor himself, and 2 chairs bearing blank pennants of plain, bleached, undyed cloth. His explanation: their absence must be marked. Places must be left for them. That's simply honor. In Gav Thorpe's Deliverance Lost, Corvus Corax is reunited with the Emperor in 922 M30 and told he has brothers. 17 of them, the Emperor says. Corax asks how, since he's numbered 19. The Emperor's expression grows bleak, filled with deep sorrow. He looks away as he answers.
The other 2, he says, is a conversation for another day.
A conversation for another day. He already knew, years before Primarch XI was even rediscovered, that 2 losses were real, and he still wouldn't name what was lost. The canonical record places Primarch XI's rediscovery late during the Great Crusade. The 19th of 20 located, arriving late. He served. The same record states that his loss threatened the core ideals of the Great Crusade and might have ruined the burgeoning Imperium. His legionaries were left leaderless, and Guilliman and Dorn argued in their favor. Spared from their Primarch's fate, attuned to new circumstances by Malcador. Canonical sources are explicit that his failure was distinguished from chaos corruption by those who knew the situation firsthand. Lorgar didn't discover the existence of chaos until after both lost Primarchs were already erased. Those with knowledge of the situation continued, even in hindsight, to separate the lost Primarchs from the 9 traitors, without mention of chaos taint. The canonical record of a Council of Terra session held between 981 M30 and the start of M31 is specific. Horus, Jagatai Khan, and Alfarius stormed the chamber to argue against removing one of the lost Primarch statues from the Investiary. They argued their fallen brother had brought glory to the Imperium. Malcador disagreed firmly. When Horus attempted to speak the name aloud in defiance, the sigillite choked him psychically. Horus managed only the beginning of a syllable. The name was already that suppressed. Within that suppression, the record preserves one phrase the edict couldn't fully excise. He embodied an aspect of the Emperor, with his own purpose and specialty. Now apply the pair logic to the elimination.
8 of the 9 pairs in this framework are structural polarities, 2 ends of a single axis, each pole requiring the other to define itself. The Sanguinius-Angron relationship is the structural anomaly. Both built to feel. Both engineered around reception and management of pain. Same design function, different outcomes. Mirrors, not opposites. And the only such relationship in the system. That anomaly points somewhere specific. If Sanguinius and Angron are the same design role, one functioning, one inverted, neither of them has their designed opposite among the 18 known. Walk the complete pair grid. Russ and Magnus accounted for. Dorn and Perturabo accounted for. Lion and Kurz accounted for. Vulcan and Ferris accounted for. Khan and Lorgar accounted for. Guilliman and Mortarion accounted for. Horus and Alfarius accounted for. Corax and Fulgrim accounted for. Sanguinius and Angron. Mirrors. Both present, and the designed counterpart of their shared function isn't in the 18. The designed counterpart of the empath function, the null, the absence of psychic resonance, the stillness that would make empathic sensitivity legible by contrast rather than overwhelming by reflection, is missing from the surviving list. Primarch XI was found late during the Great Crusade. He served briefly. He fell for reasons that weren't chaos, reasons that threatened the core ideals of the Great Crusade, reasons Dorn described years later as a separate tragedy from the other absence. The surviving record says he embodied an aspect of the Emperor, with his own purpose and specialty. The aspect the pair framework identifies as missing is the null, the counterweight to everything Sanguinius and Angron were built to be. The stillness that would make the empath function legible by contrast and stable by juxtaposition, rather than spiraling within its own resonance. The designed silence to the designed resonance field. That's what the 11th was for. The job description follows from the structure. The Emperor built a system with one gap, and that gap traces directly to a specific function. The pair system above is the strongest reading of the textual evidence across the Horus Heresy series, the Primarchs novels, and the Forge World design record. Games Workshop hasn't canonized this taxonomy. Some assignments are more secure than others. The Russ-Magnus pairing has a 2-novel account, an institutional adjudication at Nicaea, and a physical sculpting diorama built around their conflict. The Vulcan-Ferris pairing has the Mercy of the Dragon axis statement as its canonical anchor. The Dorn-Perturabo pairing holds on the transparency versus opacity axis, while the in-universe paired observation noted above
suggest an alternative grouping the comments will want to contest. The Khan Lorgar and Corax Fulgrim assignments are the most contested, named as such and committed to once. Drop the pair you change in the comments. Defend the alternative with specific texts, specific scenes, specific canonical behaviors. The assignment that draws the most argued case becomes the next video in this series. Every subsequent argument about the lost halves, the design roles the heresy consumed, the structural gaps the 41st Millennium Imperium operates without, connects back here. The 11th's name, the specific canonical traces that survive the edict, the form his null characteristic might have taken in a Primarch who reached his function rather than being lost to it. That's the next question. This one is answered. Subscribe to be there when the name gets named.